There is a place in the Pacific Ocean that does not appear on any publicly available map with full detail. It does not show up in the annual defense budget under the line items most analysts study. The aircraft that operate from it are not listed in any official Air Force inventory that Congress reviews in open session. The personnel assigned there do not talk about it. The contractors who built parts of it signed non-disclosure agreements, so airtight that even their families do not know the full scope of what they worked on, and yet it exists. It has existed for decades, and what happens inside it has shaped the outcome of conflicts, crises, and confrontations that the American public never fully understood at the time they were unfolding. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not speculation built on anonymous internet posts. This is the documented, partially declassified, historically verified reality of how the United States military operates its most sensitive aviation programs. The base is real, the aircraft are real, and the reason they stay hidden is more calculated, more deliberate, and more strategically important than most people have ever been told. If you have ever looked up at an aircraft flying overhead and wondered whether everything in the sky is accounted for, hit subscribe right now, because what we are about to walk through will permanently change the way you think about American air power. Let us start with something that might seem basic but is actually the foundation of everything we are going to cover today. The United States government publishes a defense budget every single year. That budget is debated in Congress, reviewed by committees, and eventually made available to the public in summary form. It lists aircraft programs, weapons systems, research initiatives, and base operating costs. Most people assume that document represents the full picture of what the U.S. military is spending money on and what assets it operates. That assumption is wrong. There is a portion of the federal budget that is classified, not partially obscured, not vaguely worded. Classified in a way that means the dollar amounts, the program names, the locations, the objectives, and the outcomes are never publicly disclosed. This portion of the budget is commonly referred to as the black budget, and within the black budget sits a category of programs known as Special Access Programs, or SAPs. Within SAPs, there is an even more restricted tier called Waived SAPs or Unacknowledged SAPs, sometimes referred to informally as Deep Black Programs. These are programs so sensitive that even many members of Congress who sit on defense committees do not receive full briefings on them. The president is informed. A small number of senior officials are read in, and that is essentially where the list of people with full knowledge ends. Now here is where it gets real. Those programs operate somewhere. The aircraft built under those programs have to fly somewhere. The pilots who fly them have to train somewhere. The maintenance crews who keep them operational have to work somewhere. And in the Pacific, there is a location that serves as the forward operating hub for assets that exist entirely within that classified world. To understand why the Pacific and why that specific region of it, you have to understand the strategic geography of what the United States faces in the 21st century. The Pacific Theater is the most consequential military theater on Earth right now. It encompasses the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, the Korean Peninsula, the island chains that form the first and second island barriers between the open ocean and the Chinese mainland, and the vast distances that make conventional air operations enormously complicated. Flying a conventional aircraft from a major base in Japan or Guam to a sensitive target area in the Western Pacific involves distances, flight times, and radar exposure profiles that are simply unacceptable for the most sensitive missions. You need something closer. You need something hidden. You need a base that does not appear on the public record in any meaningful way. That need was recognized decades ago, and the response to it was built quietly, incrementally, and with a level of operational security that has kept the full picture out of public view, even as fragments of it have leaked into defense journalism, satellite imagery analysis, and the testimonies of retired personnel who have chosen to speak carefully about what they witnessed. Let us talk about what we actually know versus what remains classified, because that distinction matters enormously, and it shapes everything else we are going to discuss. What we know starts with the existence of the classified aviation development and testing infrastructure that has operated in the American Southwest for generations. Area 51 in Nevada is the most famous example. It is no longer a secret that it exists. The CIA officially acknowledged its existence in documents declassified in 2013. What was tested there over the decades includes some of the most transformative aircraft in aviation history, the U-2 high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. The SR-71 Blackbird, which flew so fast and so high that intercepting it was essentially impossible for any adversary during its operational lifespan. The A-12 Oxcart, the CIA's predecessor to the SR-71, and later generations of stealth aircraft that led eventually to the F-117 Nighthawk and the B-2 Spirit bomber. All of those programs were developed, tested, and initially operated from facilities that were not publicly acknowledged at the time. The aircraft were not in any budget document that open-session congressional testimony would reference. The pilots were assigned to units that existed on paper under cover names. The bases were hidden in plain sight, protected by restricted airspace, remote geography, and a culture of secrecy so deeply embedded that even the families of the men who flew those aircraft often had no idea what their loved ones were actually doing. The pattern established in the Nevada desert in the 1950s did not stay in the Nevada desert. It expanded, it adapted, it moved into theater, meaning it moved to locations close enough to actual operational areas to be useful not just for testing, but for real missions. And in the Pacific, that expansion produced something that represents a direct evolution of everything that began at those desert test sites. Before we go any deeper, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. The overwhelming majority of people watching this right now are not subscribed. It takes 2 seconds, and it means these stories keep getting told. Now let us talk about the specific geography we are dealing with, because the Pacific is not just a large ocean. It is a collection of strategic choke points, island chains, and military positions that have been contested, studied, and fought over for nearly a century of modern history. The Mariana Islands sit in the western Pacific, roughly 1,500 miles east of the Philippines. Guam, the southernmost of the Marianas, is already home to Andersen Air Force Base, one of the most important U.S. military installations in the Pacific. B-52 bombers operate from Andersen. Tanker aircraft stage through it. Nuclear-capable bomber missions originate there. The base is not secret. It is large, well-documented, and represents the publicly acknowledged American military presence in that part of the Pacific. But Andersen is not the only installation in that region with military aviation significance. And the Marianas are not the only island group in the Pacific with infrastructure that serves purposes never fully explained in open testimony. To the northwest of the Marianas, scattered across what is known as Micronesia and the western Pacific island chains, there are locations that have hosted aviation infrastructure since World War II. Runways built during island hopping campaigns. Fuel storage facilities carved into coral and volcanic rock. Underground installations whose full scope was never made public even in the immediate post-war period when most military secrets were eventually disclosed. Some of those locations were transferred to local governance as territories became independent nations. Some were quietly retained under bilateral defense agreements that receive almost no public scrutiny, and some were upgraded, quietly, over a period of decades, to serve purposes that have never been officially acknowledged. The facility we are talking about today exists within that framework. It is not a base that was built overnight. It evolved from existing infrastructure, was augmented with classified construction projects funded through black budget line items, and eventually became a forward operating location for aviation assets that do not appear in any public accounting of American air power. Let us talk about what those assets might actually be, because this is the part of the story where the documented history of American aerospace development makes the classified present very plausible and very specific. The United States has a documented history of operating aircraft that were, at the time of their operation, entirely unknown to the public and to most of the government. The U-2 flew operational reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union for years before the shoot-down of Francis Gary Powers in 1960 brought it into public awareness. The SR-71 conducted reconnaissance missions over denied territory throughout the Cold War in ways that were never fully acknowledged contemporaneously. The F-117, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, conducted its first flight in 1977 and flew operational missions for over a decade before it was publicly acknowledged in 1988. During those years, the aircraft flew from a classified base in Nevada, pilots were assigned under cover arrangements, and the program was known to only a very small circle of government and military officials. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber was revealed publicly in 1988 with a photo release that showed the aircraft's dramatic flying wing profile. What was not revealed at the time was the full extent of its capabilities, the complete details of its stealth technology, or the specific operational plans for its use. Some of those details remain classified today. Here is the critical point. If the United States was operating stealth aircraft in complete secrecy from the 1970s through the 1980s, and if the pattern of classified aviation development has continued without interruption from that period to the present day, what does the current generation of those programs look like? What has 40 additional years of development, with access to modern computing, advanced materials science, directed energy technology, autonomous systems, and next-generation propulsion produced? The answer, according to defense analysts who study the black budget, satellite imagery specialists who examine classified base construction, and retired officials who have spoken carefully about the programs they were read into, is that the current generation of classified American aviation assets represents a technological leap beyond anything publicly acknowledged that is at least as dramatic as the leap from conventional aircraft to the F-117 was in its time. Possibly more so. And those assets operate somewhere. In the Pacific, the evidence points to a location that combines several critical characteristics. It must have runway infrastructure capable of handling large, high-performance aircraft. It must be remote enough to prevent casual observation. It must be within operational range of the areas of greatest strategic interest in the Western Pacific. It must have the logistics infrastructure to support sustained operations, meaning fuel, maintenance capability, secure communications, and housing for a significant number of personnel. And it must exist under a legal and administrative framework that allows the U.S. military to operate there with full control and without foreign oversight. Those requirements narrow the possibilities considerably. And when you apply them to the documented history of U.S. military presence in the Pacific, combined with the satellite imagery analysis that has been published by open-source intelligence researchers over the past decade, a picture emerges that is specific, compelling, and deeply consistent with everything we know about how classified American military programs operate. Let us walk through the evidence layer by layer, because the strength of this picture comes not from any single source, but from the convergence of multiple independent lines of analysis. The first layer is the budget. The classified portion of the U.S. defense budget has grown substantially since the end of the Cold War, which is counterintuitive if you assume that the disappearance of the Soviet threat would reduce the need for secret programs. In reality, the emergence of peer competitors with sophisticated air defense systems, signals intelligence capabilities, and cyber tools for penetrating conventional program security has driven the classification level of the most sensitive programs higher, not lower. Budget analysts who study the publicly available portions of the defense budget in detail and who track what is referenced obliquely in congressional testimony without being specified estimate that the classified aviation development and operations budget runs into the tens of billions of dollars annually. Programs of that scale do not test and operate aircraft from bases in the continental United States alone. They require forward operating locations in the theater where those aircraft would actually be used. The second layer is the construction record. Satellite imagery of several locations in the Western Pacific has shown, over a period of years, construction activity that is inconsistent with the publicly announced missions of those locations: extended runways, underground hangar facilities, communications infrastructure characteristic of highly sensitive command and control nodes, fuel storage expansion far beyond what would be needed for the publicly acknowledged aircraft operating from those locations. Some of this construction has been noted by open-source analysts and defense journalists. Some of it has been quietly removed from commercial satellite imagery catalogs, following what appear to be government requests. The removal of imagery is itself significant. The U.S. government has a documented history of purchasing and suppressing commercial satellite imagery of sensitive facilities. This practice was confirmed during the 1990s, when it came out that the National Reconnaissance Office had purchased imagery of certain locations, specifically to prevent its public availability. The third layer is personnel. Military personnel assigned to classified programs do not disappear entirely from the observable record. They have careers, they have promotion records, they have assignments listed in personnel databases that, while not specifying the classified nature of their work, show gaps or unusual postings that are consistent with black program assignments. Defense reporters and researchers who have studied these records have identified patterns of personnel assignments to Pacific locations that do not correspond to any publicly acknowledged unit or mission. Pilots with backgrounds in advanced aircraft programs, maintenance specialists with training in exotic materials and propulsion systems, intelligence officers with specializations that align with the operational requirements of classified reconnaissance platforms. These patterns do not prove the existence of a specific classified base, but they are exactly the pattern you would expect to see if such a base existed. The fourth layer is the testimony record. Classified programs in the United States eventually declassify, at least partially. When they do, the personnel who served in them sometimes speak, not always fully, not always with specifics that would compromise current operations, but enough to establish the pattern and the precedent. Former participants in the SR-71 program, the A-12 program, the F-1117 program, and others have described in memoirs, interviews, and congressional testimony the operational security measures, the cover assignments, the remote base operations, and the experience of serving in programs that the outside world knew nothing about. Their descriptions of what those programs felt like from the inside, the combination of isolation, pride, rigorous security discipline, and awareness that they were doing something genuinely unprecedented, are entirely consistent with what personnel who have served at classified Pacific facilities have described in carefully worded statements to trusted researchers. The fifth layer, and in some ways the most striking, is the physics. Advanced stealth aircraft require testing and operational environments that meet specific criteria. They require large blocks of restricted airspace, where radar cross-section measurements can be made without interference. They require atmospheric conditions suitable for the sensor and propulsion systems being evaluated. They require geography that prevents observation from outside the controlled area. And for operational deployment, they require proximity to the areas where they will actually be used. The Western Pacific provides atmospheric and geographic conditions that the continental United States cannot replicate. The specific threat environments that these aircraft are designed to operate in, the radar systems, the electronic warfare capabilities, the integrated air defense networks operated by potential adversaries in the region, all of those conditions exist in the Pacific in ways that can be studied and trained against only if you are actually there. A classified base in the Pacific is not just a convenience. For certain categories of classified aviation programs, it is an operational necessity. Now let us get specific about what categories of aircraft we are talking about. Because the phrase aircraft not listed in any Air Force budget covers a range of possibilities, and understanding the realistic spectrum of what those aircraft might be makes the whole picture more concrete. The most widely discussed category in defense analysis circles is the successor to the SR-71 Blackbird. The SR-71 was retired from active service in 1990, brought briefly back in 1995, and retired again in 1998. The official reason given was cost. Operating the SR-71 was extraordinarily expensive, and advocates argued that satellites could perform the same reconnaissance mission more cheaply. Many former SR-71 pilots and program veterans disagreed vehemently with that assessment, arguing that the satellite argument missed the point. A satellite follows a predictable orbit. An adversary who knows a satellite is coming can hide what they do not want observed. An aircraft that can appear over a denied area, with little or no warning, at speeds and altitudes that make interception effectively impossible, provides a fundamentally different and irreplaceable intelligence collection capability. In the years following the SR-71's retirement, multiple credible reports emerged, suggesting that a classified successor program had been developed. The aircraft referred to in these reports under various designations, and the informal name Aurora became one of the most persistent and most credible classified aviation stories of the past 30 years. Reported characteristics included hypersonic speed, meaning Mach 5 or above, altitudes above 100,000 feet, and an acoustic signature described by multiple credible witnesses near suspected test flight paths as unlike anything produced by any known aircraft. Witnesses near Edwards Air Force Base and along Pacific coastal areas described a distinctive pulsing roar that could not be explained by any publicly acknowledged aircraft, along with radar contacts and contrail patterns inconsistent with conventional aircraft operations. The Air Force denied the existence of any such program. The denial is itself noteworthy. The Air Force denied the existence of the F-117 for years while it was flying operational missions. Denial from an institution with a documented history of denying the existence of programs that were later confirmed is not the same as evidence of absence. If a hypersonic reconnaissance and strike platform of the type described in Aurora reporting exists and is operational, it would require a forward operating base in the Pacific to be tactically useful. The ranges involved in the Western Pacific Theater and the response time requirements for time-sensitive reconnaissance and strike missions make continental United States basing insufficient for anything beyond training and ferry flights. A Pacific base is not optional for that kind of capability. It is essential. The second category is autonomous and semi-autonomous unmanned combat aerial vehicles, operating at the high end of capability. The publicly acknowledged unmanned systems in the U.S. inventory, the Predator, the Reaper, the Global Hawk, are significant, but they represent the declassified tier of what the United States has developed in unmanned aviation. The classified tier, funded through the black budget programs that defense analysts can trace and outline, if not in detail, almost certainly includes systems with performance characteristics, payload capacities, stealth profiles, and operational autonomy levels that would surprise even informed observers. Some of these systems may be large enough to require conventional runway infrastructure. Some may operate in cooperative swarms that require ground control infrastructure of significant complexity. And all of them, if they are intended for operations in the Western Pacific against sophisticated adversaries, require basing in the Pacific theater. The third category, and perhaps the most consequential, is what defense technologists refer to as the next-generation penetrating capability. This is the aircraft or family of aircraft designed to operate inside the most advanced integrated air defense systems in the world and survive. The B-21 Raider is the publicly acknowledged program in this category, and it is an extraordinary aircraft, but the B-21 is acknowledged. It appears in budget documents, its development is tracked by congressional oversight committees. It will eventually be photographed, publicly revealed, and operated from bases that are known to the public. The B-21 is the surface of the iceberg. What exists below the surface of what the black budget funds in penetrating strike and reconnaissance capability is, by definition, not the B-21. Programs at the deep black level in this category would represent aircraft designs, propulsion concepts, and materials technologies that the United States has specifically chosen not to reveal. The decision to keep a program at that level of classification is not made lightly. It reflects a judgment that the capability gap between that system and anything an adversary possesses or can develop in the near term is so significant that revealing it would eliminate the strategic advantage. You keep something secret when revealing it would give your adversary the information they need to defeat it. The aircraft that remain in the deepest tier of classification are there because they are the ones that matter most. Those aircraft fly somewhere in the Pacific. They are maintained somewhere in the Pacific. The pilots who fly them, or the controllers who operate them if they are unmanned, work from somewhere in the Pacific. And that somewhere is a base that does not appear in any publicly available document. Let us talk about what that base would actually look like in practical terms, because understanding the physical and operational reality of a classified forward operating location makes the whole picture come alive. First, the runway. Any base supporting high-performance aircraft needs a substantial runway. The SR-71 required a runway of at least 8,000 feet for normal operations and preferred longer. Hypersonic platforms would have similar or greater requirements. Large unmanned systems of the type under discussion would need similar infrastructure. A classified base in the Pacific supporting these categories of aircraft would have at minimum a runway in the 10,000 to 12,000 foot range, with the associated taxiways, ramp space, and aircraft shelter infrastructure. Building that kind of runway without it being detectable from satellite imagery is essentially impossible. What is possible, and what the evidence suggests has happened in at least one Pacific location, is building it in a place where its existence can be attributed to another purpose. A runway long enough for classified high-performance aircraft can also be described as a runway for emergency diversion of commercial flights, a runway for humanitarian operations, a runway for conventional military aircraft that do operationally exist. The infrastructure is dual use. The classified mission it primarily serves is invisible in the public record. Second, the hangars. Aircraft of the type we are discussing cannot sit on an open ramp. The stealth coatings on advanced low-observable aircraft are sensitive to weather, to solar radiation, and to observation. They require climate-controlled enclosed facilities. And classified aircraft cannot be observed by satellite, which means their hangars must be either underground or built in a way that prevents overhead observation. Underground hangar construction in the Pacific is expensive, but not impossible. The volcanic and coral geology of many Pacific islands can be excavated to create extensive underground facilities. The Japanese military demonstrated this comprehensively during World War II, carving enormous underground installations into Pacific islands under conditions far more difficult than what modern construction techniques face. The United States has continued that tradition in classified facilities in the Pacific, and the satellite imagery record shows construction activity at certain locations that is consistent with underground facility development, even when the surface-level infrastructure appears modest. Third, the personnel infrastructure. A classified forward operating base in the Pacific does not advertise itself with signs and a large visible population. The personnel footprint is deliberately kept small. Rotational assignments mean that large numbers of people are not permanently stationed there in ways that would create observable patterns. Housing is modest and functional. The base may be co-located with or administratively associated with a publicly acknowledged facility to provide cover for the movements of personnel and aircraft. A C-17 landing at a location associated with a known logistics mission does not attract the same scrutiny as an unexplained aircraft landing at an isolated island runway. The cover architecture of a classified base is as carefully designed as the base itself. Fourth, the communications and command infrastructure. A base supporting classified aviation operations in the Pacific must have secure communications links capable of handling the enormous data volumes generated by advanced reconnaissance systems. It must have connections to the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the operational commanders who direct the missions flown from it. That communications infrastructure has a physical signature: antenna farms, satellite terminals, hardened underground cable connections. When satellite imagery analysts see communications infrastructure at a Pacific location that is grossly disproportionate to the publicly acknowledged mission of that location, it is a reliable indicator that the location serves purposes not publicly acknowledged. Multiple Pacific locations show exactly that pattern. Now let us take a step back and address the question that is almost certainly occurring to you at this point. If this is real, if a classified Pacific base exists and operates aircraft that are not in any public budget, then why does no one talk about it? Why has it not been revealed? Why do the journalists and researchers and satellite analysts who are clearly circling this story not name it directly and definitively? The answer to that question is itself one of the most important things to understand about how classified American military programs actually work. The secrecy around these programs is not maintained primarily through direct coercion. It is maintained through a system of compartmentalization, legal obligation, and cultural discipline that is extraordinarily effective. Personnel assigned to classified programs sign legal agreements that carry severe penalties for unauthorized disclosure. They are educated extensively about what they can and cannot say, and to whom. They are given cover stories for their assignments that are plausible enough to satisfy casual questions from family and friends. They understand that the security of the program they serve is directly connected to the safety of the personnel who operate it, and to the strategic advantage it provides to the nation. That understanding is not abstract. For people who have served in combat or who understand what it means to operate in denied airspace against adversaries who will shoot you down if they can find you, the operational security discipline is personal and deeply held. Journalists and researchers who study these programs are also working within constraints. They can publish speculation, analysis, and inference. They cannot publish classified information that has been illegally disclosed to them without exposing their sources to prosecution and themselves to legal jeopardy. The most credible defense reporters in the country have been circling the classified Pacific base story for years. They have pieced together substantial parts of the picture, but the specific, named, coordinates and mission-confirmed confirmation that would make it a front-page story rather than a deeply informed analysis piece has been deliberately withheld by everyone in a position to provide it. And here is the piece of this that most people miss. The classified programs themselves are not entirely invisible. They are partially visible in ways that are carefully controlled. The government occasionally allows just enough to be seen to accomplish specific objectives. A photograph of an unusual aircraft silhouette released through a controlled leak manages expectations and signals capability to adversaries without fully revealing the details that would allow countermeasures to be developed. A reference in congressional testimony to a program by a code name that means nothing to the public but everything to an adversary's intelligence analysts sends a message while maintaining technical secrecy. The management of what is known versus what is secret is itself a strategic tool. The classified Pacific base exists partly in the visible record and partly hidden from it, and that combination is not accidental. Let us talk about some specific programs and incidents that, taken together, build the picture of what is happening in that Pacific location right now. In 2014 and again in 2017, pilots flying commercial aircraft over the Pacific reported unusual aircraft encounters that they logged with aviation authorities. The descriptions in those reports were striking. Aircraft operating at altitudes significantly above normal commercial traffic, speeds inconsistent with any acknowledged aircraft type, flight profiles that suggested either extraordinary performance characteristics or, in some cases, non-human control characteristics, consistent with autonomous operation. Aviation authorities in multiple countries received similar reports during roughly the same period. None of those reports generated public official explanations. Aviation mystery reports from professional commercial pilots who stake their reputations on accuracy are not the same as UFO reports from casual observers. When multiple experienced professional aviators report the same class of unusual encounter over the same geographic region within a compressed time period, the most parsimonious explanation consistent with all the evidence is that something real and classified was operating in that airspace. In the years following the acknowledgement of the F-35 and the B-21 programs, defense budget analysts noticed something interesting. The rate of declassification of previously black programs did not increase as those programs matured and became public. If anything, it decreased. The number of programs moving from classified to unacknowledged status appeared to be growing faster than the number of programs moving from classified to acknowledged status. The implication is that the classified aviation enterprise is expanding rather than contracting. More programs are being started and kept secret than are being completed and revealed. The frontier of what exists but is not acknowledged appears to be moving faster than the frontier of what is eventually confirmed. The National Reconnaissance Office, the agency responsible for operating the United States classified satellite constellation and certain other classified collection platforms, has expanded its acknowledged budget and workforce substantially over the past 15 years. But analysts who study the intelligence community structure note that the acknowledged NRO budget does not fully account for the scale of classified collection activity that the agency's operational footprint implies. The gap between the acknowledged and the implied is consistent with a significant collection capability that operates outside the satellite-based paradigm, meaning aircraft, meaning platforms that fly from somewhere in the Pacific, meaning the facility we are discussing. In 2020, a series of Freedom of Information requests filed by defense researchers targeting construction contracts, environmental assessments, and logistics agreements for several Pacific locations produced responses that were remarkable, not for what they contained, but for what had been redacted. Entire sections of what should have been routine administrative documents were blacked out. Contract values were hidden. Contractor names were removed. In some cases, the existence of the document itself was acknowledged, but the entirety of its content was withheld. The specific locations targeted by those redactions corresponded closely to the locations that satellite imagery analysis had flagged as potentially hosting classified aviation infrastructure. Redactions of that depth applied to documents about a remote Pacific location are not what you see for routine military construction. They are what you see when the activity being documented touches something in the deepest tier of classification. Let us talk about the strategic logic of why this specific moment in history makes the existence and continued investment in this facility more important than ever before. The United States is in a period of direct, high-stakes strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. That competition is most intense in the Pacific, and the most sensitive dimension of it involves the ability of the United States to project air power into the Western Pacific in the face of what China has built over the past 20 years to deny it. China's anti-access and area denial capabilities, known in military shorthand as A2AD, represent a massive investment in the systems needed to detect, track, and destroy American aircraft and ships operating in or approaching Chinese strategic space. Long-range surface-to-air missile systems, over-the-horizon radar networks, electronic warfare and jamming capabilities, anti-ship ballistic missiles designed specifically to threaten the aircraft carriers that have historically been the primary instrument of American power projection in the Pacific, cyber capabilities designed to penetrate and disrupt the command and control networks on which conventional American operations depend. Against that kind of adversary, conventional air power operating from acknowledged bases is at a significant disadvantage. Andersen Air Force Base on Guam is well within range of Chinese ballistic missiles. American air bases in Japan are within range of Chinese conventional and potentially nuclear strike. A conflict in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea would begin with Chinese planners targeting every acknowledged American base in the region in the opening hours, attempting to destroy the aircraft, logistics infrastructure, and command facilities needed to sustain American air power. Classified assets operating from a classified base present a fundamentally different problem for Chinese planners. You cannot target what you cannot find. You cannot suppress air power that operates from a location you cannot identify. You cannot develop countermeasures to aircraft you do not know exist. The classified Pacific base is not just a secret, because secrecy is a default preference of the American military. It is a secret because in the specific strategic context of competition with China in the Pacific, secrecy is a decisive force multiplier. The aircraft that operate from it and survive because of their stealth and performance characteristics are made exponentially more effective by operating from a base that the adversary's targeting planners cannot put on a strike list. This is why the investment in the facility has grown over the past decade, rather than declining. As China's A2AD capability has expanded, the value of a classified forward operating base that exists outside the targeting picture has increased. The two dynamics are directly correlated. Every improvement in China's ability to find and strike acknowledged American bases increases the strategic value of the one base that is not acknowledged. There is another dimension to this that goes beyond the China competition specifically. The lessons of recent conflicts have reinforced a principle that American military planners have understood since the Cold War, but sometimes forgotten in the post-Cold War period of unchallengeable conventional supremacy. Operational surprise is a force multiplier of the first order, the ability to introduce a capability that an adversary did not know existed, at a moment when they cannot adapt to it, can change the outcome of a conflict in ways that no amount of conventional force advantage can replicate. The introduction of stealth aircraft in the 1991 Gulf War demonstrated this principle in ways that still resonate in military planning today. F-1117 pilots flying against the most densely defended airspace in the world at that time suffered zero losses while destroying targets that conventional aircraft could not have approached. The aircraft existed. The adversary did not know about it. The result was a one-sided dominance that lasted for the duration of the campaign. The classified Pacific base and the aircraft it operates represent the next generation of that same principle. Whatever those aircraft can do, that publicly acknowledged aircraft cannot, the adversary does not know about it. They cannot plan around it. They cannot develop countermeasures to it. They cannot factor it into their assessments of what an American response to a Pacific contingency would look like. And in a world where the opening moves of any significant conflict are planned in extraordinary detail months or years in advance, having a capability that does not appear in any adversary's planning calculus is worth more than almost any quantifiable military advantage. Now let us talk about the human dimension of this, because behind every classified program and every secret base are real people doing real jobs under extraordinary conditions. The men and women who serve at a classified Pacific forward operating location live in a world of restrictions that most people who have served in the military would find unusual even by the standards of military service. Their communications home are monitored. What they can tell their families about where they are and what they are doing is tightly controlled. Cover stories for their assignments are provided and maintained. When they return from deployments, the decompression process includes security debriefs designed to reinforce what can and cannot be discussed. The psychological weight of sustained secrecy, combined with operational stress, is real and significant, and the programs that employ these personnel have invested in support structures to manage it, because the alternative is people who break under the combination of isolation and pressure and say things they should not say. The pilots who fly classified aircraft from that Pacific base, if they fly manned aircraft, are among the most skilled aviators in the world. The selection process for classified aviation programs draws from the best performers in the acknowledged aviation community, and then screens again for the specific characteristics that classified operations require. Not just flying skill, though that is the baseline, but judgment, discretion, the ability to operate in ambiguous situations without the support structures that conventional aviation operations provide, the ability to complete a mission and then return and say nothing about it to anyone who is not cleared for the specific program. That combination of elite performance and absolute operational security discipline defines the culture of the classified aviation community in a way that sets it apart from anything in the conventional military. The maintainers and logistics personnel who keep the aircraft operational face their own unique challenges. Working on aircraft whose existence is classified means working without the documentation infrastructure that conventional maintenance relies on. Technical manuals exist, but are secured at classification levels that create access complications. Parts procurement goes through channels designed to obscure the end use of what is being purchased. The entire logistics chain for a classified aircraft program is built to prevent any single point of observation from revealing the full picture of what the program involves. A parts supplier knows they are selling a specialized component. They do not necessarily know what aircraft it goes into. A transport aircraft delivering equipment to a specific location knows it is delivering cargo. It does not necessarily know what that cargo will be used for. The compartmentalization is layered and deliberate, and it works. Let us spend some time on what the future of this classified Pacific capability looks like, because the trajectory of American aerospace development suggests that what exists today will look modest compared to what is being built for the next generation of this competition. The convergence of artificial intelligence, advanced materials, directed energy, hypersonic propulsion, and autonomous systems is producing capability concepts in classified aviation programs that would have been science fiction 20 years ago. Aircraft that can change their observable signatures dynamically in response to the threat environment. Systems that operate cooperatively in large numbers with minimal human control, able to adapt their behavior in real time to a changing tactical situation. Propulsion concepts that operate on principles not found in any publicly acknowledged aircraft. Sensor packages that collect intelligence on a scale and at a resolution that makes current systems look primitive. All of that development requires a place to operate from. As those capabilities mature from experimental to operational, the forward-basing requirement in the Pacific becomes more important, not less. The classified Pacific base is not a relic of Cold War secrecy adapted awkwardly to a new era. It is a facility that is growing in importance precisely because the strategic environment that makes it necessary is intensifying. The next decade in the Pacific is going to be defined by competition between acknowledged American power, the carrier strike groups, the air bases, the submarines, the acknowledged aircraft and missiles, and the classified American capability that exists outside any adversary's planning framework. The classified Pacific base is where that second category lives and operates. It is the part of American air power that no adversary can plan around, because no adversary knows the full extent of what it includes. And here is perhaps the most important thing to understand about all of this. The fact that we are talking about it in this level of detail, drawing on satellite imagery analysis, budget research, personnel records, historical precedent, and the testimony of people who have carefully described parts of what they witnessed, does not mean the secrecy has failed. The existence of a classified base, stated at the level of generality that the available evidence supports, is not a compromise of the specific operational details that make the base and its aircraft strategically valuable. An adversary's intelligence service, knowing that the United States operates classified aviation assets from a classified Pacific location, is very different from that intelligence service knowing exactly where that location is, exactly what aircraft operate from it, exactly what those aircraft can do, and exactly how they would be employed in a specific contingency. The gap between what can be inferred from public sources and what would actually be needed to target or counter these capabilities remains enormous, and the people responsible for protecting those capabilities are very good at their jobs. The history of American classified aviation programs is ultimately a history of one of the most remarkable achievements of sustained human ingenuity, operational discipline, and strategic patience that the modern era has produced. From the first flights of the U-2 over Soviet territory in the mid-1950s to whatever is flying from the classified Pacific base right now, there is an unbroken thread of American commitment to maintaining technological advantages that exist beyond the adversary's knowledge. That commitment has not always been perfectly executed. Programs have had accidents. People have died in the service of capabilities the public would not learn about for decades. Security has occasionally been breached. The history has its dark chapters alongside its extraordinary achievements, but the core commitment has held. And in the current strategic environment, as the United States faces in China an adversary that combines sophisticated technological capability with a genuine willingness to compete across every dimension of military power, that commitment to classified aviation capability, forward deployed in the Pacific, may represent one of the most important strategic assets the United States possesses. The base that does not appear on any public map, the aircraft that do not appear in any public budget, the pilots and maintainers and intelligence analysts who serve there and never talk about it, they are part of a story that most Americans will never fully know, but they are doing it anyway. In the Pacific, in the dark, flying aircraft that do not officially exist from a base that is not officially there, doing work that will not be officially acknowledged for years or decades if it ever is. That is the reality of American air power at its deepest level. Not the aircraft you see at air shows. Not the programs debated in congressional hearings. Not the jets photographed on carrier decks. The aircraft that matter most in the most dangerous possible future are the ones you have never heard of, maintained by people you will never know, flying from a base that the most powerful adversaries on Earth cannot put on a targeting list. The budget is classified, the base is classified, the aircraft are classified, but the strategic purpose behind all of it is as clear as anything in American military history. To maintain, at whatever cost and with whatever level of secrecy is required, an advantage in the air that no adversary can take away, because no adversary fully knows it exists. That advantage is being built, maintained, and expanded right now, in the Pacific. At a base you will not find on any official map, with aircraft that are not in any budget you will ever be allowed to read, flown by men and women who will go home someday and never tell you what they did. And the extraordinary thing is, that is exactly how it is supposed to work. If this story has changed the way you think about American air power and the world you do not see behind the one that is publicly acknowledged, hit the like button now and subscribe so you never miss a story that goes this deep. The most important things happening in the sky above this planet are the things you are not being told about.